How well will Flight Simulator 2020 run on the minimum spec PC? Well, it's a question that's certainly on a few people's minds, so I thought I would try and help out. Let's jump in and take a look. This sim is one of the few games to be released with 3 sets of hardware requirements. In addition to the usual minimum and recommended, Microsoft also published an ideal spec. Now, whilst most videos so far on YouTube have seen the sim running on high-end hardware, there's been little to nothing showing it running on lower-end hardware. So I've been testing that out. The build I used here is very close to minimum spec, and you can see the details on the screen right now. Overall then, if you're unsure as to how well your PC will run Flight Simulator, then this video should give you a bit of an idea. All that said, do please keep in mind a very important point. I am currently using a preview build, which will likely be a little different at least to the final release, so don't consider this video as a benchmark. It's simply here to help you if you're unsure or if you're sitting on the fence. Generally speaking then, I found that when running on the default low settings with FXAA, this hardware was generally very much up to the job. For the most part, the sim can handle a constant 30 FPS and sometimes reach significantly higher. In cities such as New York, however, the game does struggle to maintain a constant 30 FPS. This is also affected somewhat by altitude. The lower you are, the more complex the scenery is, the harder your PC will struggle. But overall, due to the slower pace of flight sims, this is generally pretty acceptable. The story is very different with the medium settings, however. Step past the low settings in any way whatsoever in cities and the experience very quickly becomes uncomfortable. The story is different if you're outside cities, but this is New York, so let's have a look at this for now. It's likely you'll be able to mess with the settings somewhat to improve performance a little. After all, there is a huge array of different settings, but that's something we can look at in a future video when the final version of the sim has actually been released. There is another caveat here that should be pointed out. All scenes in this video were recorded in a small plane. If you move into one of the large airliners such as the 747 or the A320, then this will certainly impact performance, even if only a little. It's not something I've focused on in this particular video, however, as I know there are still improvements going on with airliners, so again, we'll wait for final release to have a look at that. Moving away from cities, we are here in Sedona, Arizona. And straight away you can see performance is much better, although on takeoff, on maybe 30% of occasions, I found a frame rate would dip a little, likely caused by a temporary increased load on the CPU. The game very quickly moves past this hurdle though and brings the frame rates up to a very nice level. You can see here what I'm talking about, and we'll have another look at this in just a moment where this doesn't actually happen. Like I say, it only happens on around about 30% of takeoffs in this particular area. In general then, flying around regions such as this is a wonderful experience. Even on low settings, the sim is very pretty. Again, altitude does seem to play a part. The higher you are, the easier time the PC appears to have. Here, we are at around 8,500 feet, that's approximately 4,000 feet above ground level in this location. And you can see that the hardware is taking all of this in its stride. Now, you may have heard that clouds can hit performance a little. So we're going to try that takeoff again, this time with a bit of cloud cover. You can see that the frame rates are actually very similar to before, and additionally on this particular occasion I didn't get that drop in frame rates as the plane left the ground. Generally the impact of cloud cover is minimal in areas like this, however the more cloud you enable, the more performance will actually get hit. Also, changing cloud cover in real time really does seem to be something that lower spec hardware dislikes. What seems to be going on here is that the computer, the game, has got to think about it a little bit as it generates the new clouds. These are volumetric, and that of course means that these are hard on the GPU. Now once the clouds have been generated, the frame rates settle down a little and do start to improve. As I mentioned earlier, you can see here how increasing the coverage and density of clouds has a direct hit on the frame rates. But even with the heavier layers of clouds enabled, you will certainly be able to fly through them on lower end hardware, although this will hurt performance far more in built up areas such as cities. Interestingly, if you eventually decide to return back to clear skies, frame rates do not increase again. Possibly an artifact of the preview build, time will tell, but it's something that's worth keeping in mind. Whilst we're out here in Sedona, I wanted to do one more takeoff from the same runway, again with a small amount of cloud cover. This time we are using medium settings. So here we see a return to the now familiar issue. When close to complex scenery, usually at lower altitudes, the resources seem to be consumed at a much higher rate, and this results in frame rates that switch between low and reasonable. Pretty much then, it seems that medium won't be particularly ideal in locations like this, although that said, from time to time you do get some smooth sailing. At higher altitudes, however, and without cloud cover, things work very nicely indeed, and I'm sure many would be very happy to play with this level of performance. Again, it's likely going to be a case of experimenting with various settings to see what works best, something which we can return to later for a closer look when the sim releases on the 18th of August. So then, that pretty much brings us to an end of this video. I hope it's been of some help to those of you who have been wondering about Flight Simulator's performance on lower end hardware. Overall, it works pretty well indeed. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.